This is the tune-required Steeda ProFlow cold air intake for the 2015 to 2017 GT Mustang. And you're gonna wanna check this out if you're looking for a cold air intake that requires a tune so you can get the most performance benefit out of it, that keeps the direct cold air feed from the grille of the car, and that has an optional sound tube delete. Most aftermarket cold air intakes out there either keep the sound tube that comes on the factory intake or they delete it. The Steeda ProFlow gives you the option to handle it as you want to, so you can choose to keep it or choose to delete it. The choice is up to you. The install here is going to be easy. It's a 1 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter, and you can plan on it taking an hour or 2 tops. First things first, this is a tune-required intake, so we're going to talk about power numbers. Our stock Dyno run gave us numbers of 391 horsepower and 367 foot-pounds of torque. After we installed the cold air intake in tune, we made numbers of 406 horsepower and 379 foot-pounds of torque. That makes for a peak gain of 15 horsepower and 12 foot-pounds of torque, and even more importantly, curve gains of 18 horsepower and 29 foot-pounds of torque. Numbers aside, we can talk about some of the things that make this intake different from others. Right off the bat, I can tell you the big things are going to be the optional sound tube delete, the filter housing design, and the mass airflow housing that this comes with. And since we're talking about differences, I'll say right now that this intake is much like Steeda's no tune required ProFlow intake. The no tune required ProFlow intake has a restrictor insert for the MAF housing that you can run. When you remove that insert, the intake needs to be tuned, and it turns into this intake, the tune required intake. Normally, an aftermarket intake would require a tune if the mass airflow housing size is much larger than the factory one, so a computer tune would be required to recalibrate. So in this case, you need that computer retune due to the size of the mass airflow housing. The MAF housing on this intake is different than most of your other options. This comes with a CNC machined housing that is separate from the intake tube. It's made to give a clean mass airflow signal, and that means smooth air delivery and therefore smooth throttle response. Just keep in mind that this is the MAF housing only, you aren't getting a new sensor with this. So let's look at the filter housing. It's an open element housing, which means it doesn't have a lid and it isn't closed off. But it keeps the direct cold air feed from the grille of the car, and this is an excellent thing. It also has this rubber gasket that goes around the top of the housing, and that's meant to seal the intake off from the engine compartment air and keep intake temps down. When it comes to the intake tube, this is Steeda's ProFlow intake tube, and it gives you the option of retaining the factory sound tube or blocking it off completely. This is a little bit different than other aftermarket cold air intakes that normally don't give you an option like this. The air filter is a reusable oiled filter. It's made from layers of nanofiber and screens for durability and filtration. The oil on it is used to treat the nanofiber to give it a tackiness and give it the filtration abilities that it needs. What's nice about a reusable filter is that you can clean the filter when it's dirty and reinstall it, and you don't have to worry about having to purchase a new filter every time. Looking at the price for this intake, you can expect to pay a little over the $350 mark for this. Now, like I said, this intake does have some features that most other aftermarket cold air intakes don't offer, like the CNC MAF housing and the choice to block off the factory sound tube or keep it. But if you're thinking this is too much for you, there are other cold air intake options on the site that are less expensive. As for the install, it's nothing too difficult, and the intake will come with all of the items that you'll need to complete the install. All you will really need to complete this install is a few basic hand tools. This is probably one of the easier mods that you can tackle with your new Mustang, and it'll take about a half hour or an hour tops. I'm gonna call it a 1 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter. All that you're gonna need to do is remove the factory airbox. You'll need to disconnect the airbox from the inner fender and remove the inlet tube from the air filter and the throttle body. But we're just talking about a few bolts and clamps to get this done. This intake installs nearly the same way the factory airbox came out, so the install is pretty much the same as installing a factory intake. You're gonna need to decide what you're gonna do about your sound tube, keep it on or delete it, and that's gonna be up to you. Alright guys, so today we're going to install the Steeda ProFlow cold air intake, and in order to do that, the first thing we're going to need to do is take off our engine cover. It is held in by just rubber grommets, so you're just going to pick a corner and pry up on it and just wiggle it out of place. After that, we're just going to move on to removing our stock cold air intake. Alright guys, next thing we're going to do is we're just going to loosen the clamps all throughout our stock intake here. There are a couple different sizes throughout. You'll see me switch back and forth with my sockets. Just make sure you have a basic socket set handy and you guys will be alright. We're also going to need to undo all of the connections that we have going on here. A lot of them are clipped into place, so you'll just need to undo the clips and slide off. Now we're just gonna unplug the mass airflow sensor. You just have to make sure you grab the little red tab underneath. Once you pull out, the little red tab slides out and you'll be able to slide off your sensor. So this is the underside of your mass airflow sensor. This is the red tab that you want to pull out. You'll push it in to lock it back into place, but before you can remove the sensor, you just pull your tab out, that'll unlock it, and then you'll be able to pull off. One of the last things we have here is to undo this bolt holding the airbox to the fender. So I'm gonna try to take the stock intake out as one big piece. I have everything loose for now, so I'm gonna slide off at the throttle body end first and then work my way down around the airbox. All right, with our stock airbox out, I will say there is a rubber grommet on the bottom of the stock airbox that you guys are gonna have. We don't have it on our car. You're gonna wanna make sure you pull that off and plug it back into your fender where it belongs. Before we get started with the Steeda, we do have a few things that we have to transfer over and assemble before we throw this thing in the car. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna take the aluminum barbed stud that Steeda gives us, along with a bolt and washer, and we're gonna install it into the front hole of the airbox here. This is a mounting location. This is an 11mm, I'm just gonna tighten this down. Next, we're gonna transfer over our mass airflow sensor from the stock airbox to our Steeda airbox. Steeda is gonna give you new hardware, so once you undo the stock one, you don't need to keep your hardware. The next step is to get the velocity stack that Steeda gives you attached to the airbox. I'm just gonna get these started by hand tightening at first, just so I have everything lined up. You do wanna make sure before you bolt this down that you have the velocity stack in the correct orientation, because your mass airflow sensor will need to be facing forward. All right, now that I have them started by hand, I'm actually going to use a ratchet and get them in there tighter. Okay. So the next step after you get the velocity stack installed onto the airbox is to get your air filter installed onto the velocity stack. It's simply just gonna slide over and you're gonna tighten the clamp that's already on your air filter. Now I will say this is one of the main differences between your stock setup and your aftermarket setup that you have here. You have a nice big cone-shaped filter. This is reusable, so you guys can wash it, clean it, reinstall it when you're done. You don't have to buy a new air filter every time. I'm just rotating this so that my clamp is in a good position to where I can tighten it very easily. This is an 8mm. I'm just gonna double check and make sure the clamp is sitting flat. And our air filter feels good on here. Next, we're gonna install the rubber trim around the edges of the Steeda airbox. All right, so next we're gonna install our mass airflow sensor into our velocity stack here. Steeda does give you new hardware for that. And guys, this only goes in one way, so just make sure you have the correct orientation on the mass airflow sensor. All right, so we do need to modify the cold air feed duct from the stock airbox before we can transfer it over to the Steeda airbox. We're gonna be cutting off the resonator here so it'll fit on the Steeda airbox. So we're gonna be cutting here along this slip, and I'll show you guys in a second. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw this in the vise and then take a Sawzall to it and just cut this plastic piece off here. With the resonator cut off, we can now plug it using the plug that Steeda gives us. Now we can install the cold air feed onto the Steeda airbox. It's just gonna snap into place. So now I'm gonna install the silicone sleeve onto the mass airflow housing here. I'm gonna install a clamp over it first. I am gonna leave it loose just to make sure I have enough room. And I'm gonna slide this on further than I really need to, just to make it easy when I install my intake tube. I'm gonna tighten the clamp down just a little bit, but like I said, I am gonna leave it loose just because I wanna make sure that I have enough wiggle room. All right, so it's still loose, but I'm gonna let it bite a little bit. And now we'll be all set for the intake tube. All right, so now we're just gonna slide our airbox right into place. All right, so you're gonna wanna make sure that that aluminum barb that you installed in the airbox is sitting in that grommet that you put back in your fender. And I have all my bolt holes lined up, so I'm just going to run the bolt back in the airbox, through the airbox into the fender, and bolt this down. All right, so next we're gonna install the silicone reducer onto the throttle body, small side on the throttle body, large side facing towards the intake pipe. I'm just gonna make sure that the clamps are flat and even because you really wanna make sure that you're getting a good bite with the clamp once you tighten it down. All right, next we're gonna install the lower PCV adapter into our intake tube, followed by this piece of hose and our adapter. This is just gonna push into place. Now we're gonna install a piece of hose onto the adapter. All right, so now we're gonna tighten this clamp down so our hose doesn't go anywhere. All right, now we're gonna slide our adapter in and then clamp that down too. Before we get this in the car, we're gonna install our other two adapters. Obviously, your larger adapter is gonna go into your larger hole and your smaller one into the smaller hole. So you need to get the adapter installed through the grommet, but not push the grommet through. All right, so now we're ready to install our intake tube. We're just gonna slide it into the couplers and tighten the clamps down. One of the last things we have to do is make our connections. We also have to plug in our mass airflow sensor, and then we're gonna move on to uploading our tune. Mass airflow sensor just plugs into place, and then we gotta make sure we slide our red tab in. You heard it lock into place. That's gonna wrap things up for the Steeda ProFlow cold air intake for the 2015 and newer GT Mustang. But you can always check it out more online right here at AmericanMuscle.com.